Recording started.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering about that. All right, so we are recording. All right, well, welcome to the August 9th meeting of the Issaquah Environmental Board. I'm Jamie Finch and I'll be your chair tonight. Due to the hybrid nature of this meeting, we will have some members attending in person and others by computer or phone. For those attending remotely, please state your name before speaking, mute your microphone when you are not, and if you have desire to speak, please raise your hand, which I think is the right Teams function, and we will do our best. If you're not getting called on, just unmute and interrupt us, because that can happen. Everyone that is in person, as we always do, please flip your card to their name card to the side if you would like to speak. And then for any key topics, we'll try to summarize the agreement at the end of the topic. So I think from there, Stacy, if you could take us through attendance, that'd be great.
Tom Anderson,
Here.
Nancy Davidson, here. Jamie Finch,
Here.
Raj Gopandi,
Here.
Joy Lewis has an excused absence. Ashwin Kanan,
Here.
Ashwin Manoharan, Don McWilliams,
Here.
and Newcomb, Janet Wall.
Here.
Dixie Bear will be late, or she, depending on her timing, may not show tonight. And then Alex Lee Tigner.
Here.
We have quorum.
Right. Next up, we have the approval of the minutes. Do we have any comments from the board on the minutes in the packet? Hearing none, those are approved as presented. Next up, we have public comment. Do we have anyone?
You do not have any members of the public, and then we did receive comments via email from Connie Marsh about a week ago.
Well, I think then, since we don't have anyone attending from the public, we can move past public comments into our agenda items, with the first one being communications overview and public engagement toolkit.
Wonderful.
Introduce yourself.
Very well, as Stacy pulls that up, it's a pleasure to meet all of you. My name is Thomas Rush. I am the communications manager for the city. Stacy asked me to potentially show up for one of these to let you know more about what the communications team does, highlight some of the things that we've recently accomplished, and be sure to answer any and all of your questions. So happy to do that.
Questions as you go, or questions at the end?
Whatever the group is more comfortable with, I'm happy to take them on the fly if that's better for you. Sounds good. Okay. Looks like we're ready. The two big things I was hoping to cover today is just give you a broad overview of what the communications team entails, kind of our responsibilities, and highlight some of the tasks that we're responsible for. And then the second is we recently redid our public engagement toolkit. And I kind of wanted to walk you through what that is used for, and just hear if you have any feedback for us. So number one, all right, so what do? Ideally, we create a very engaged community, and having people feel like they understand what the city is accomplishing and how they can stay engaged on those topics is really what drives our overall goals. The mission is much longer, but it basically boils down to making sure customers, residents, businesses, everyone feels like what they need to get from the city in terms of communication is done effectively by our team. It's a small team. Our team is only 3 people. We have a few other staff who assist on things, but it's really myself, the communications manager, we have a communications coordinator who helps with our websites and their task outline. And then we have a media production specialist who helps with all of our videography needs, helps make sure we meet all our goals in terms of capturing video for boards, commissions, city councils, those kind of things. So a mighty team of 3. If you're curious how the communications division kind of fits in the overall city structure, We report to the Administrative Services Department Director, one of the many internal services. So that's how it's kind of viewed, along with facilities and IT. Who am I forgetting right now? Emergency management, thank you. Fleet as well, thank you. Good to have staff here to back me up so I don't forget anyone and get in trouble. Some of our roles. So we're wholly responsible for the city's website. We manage every single page, all the content that's on it. We handle all the city's social media channels. So every single one of our, I think, 10 different platforms right now. Neighborhood engagement is also handled through our thing. So anytime we want to set up any meetings localized to smaller areas like neighborhoods or even, micro divisions within those neighborhoods, we set those kind of things up. We sit on nearly every capital project to provide that perspective and consult from public engagement perspective to make sure project managers feel like they have all the tools they need to make sure residents are aware of the upcoming work and how best to kind of manage that. And finally, as I alluded to, our video specialist, make sure all of our meetings are covered.
So when you talk about project outreach, sorry, I'm Nancy Davidson, by the way, are you talking about things like, I know we're doing a comp plan update. We did Title 18 recently. So were you involved in all of those outreach with the community as well?
Absolutely. So for Title 18 is a good example. All of the structure done with that is organized through our public engagement toolkit, which is one of the tools we provide project managers, but that lets us talk through what makes sense for when to engage with the public to make sure we get feedback at the right time from residents and they feel like their voices are heard. Another project that finished this year that had a lot of easy to identify examples is Blackberry Park over in South Lake Sammamish, making sure we set up the right meetings to get public input, to set up surveys, to hear any feedback on the designs. All of that is kind of done with our consulting on those projects.
Can I ask you one more question? So last meeting, though I was not here, there was a presentation about the sewer comprehensive plan, and in it, there's a conversation about dealing with septic tanks in the community. Are you involved in that? Because that seems to me like a huge neighborhood issue.
Yeah, I know that topic in particular has a few neighborhoods that are very invested in learning more about what's coming from that. That topic has not come up to me recently. We talked about it in the past a little bit. I know it's upcoming again. I'll be sure to reach out to the project managers as they need to start developing those strategies, but it hasn't come to my desk recently.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Tom Anderson here. How about content for like the newsletter? Is that all on your shoulders, or does that different departments feed content to you for assimilation in the newsletter, and also project specific content? How does all that flow?
Sure. So we handle building out the newsletters. Obviously, the topics within them, we rely on subject matter experts around the city. So if a project's coming up with a survey or something like that, that we need to make sure we help with outreach on, make sure the project managers are helping to kind of build out that content. But in terms of building it all together and aggregating it for the newsletters, that does land on communications' shoulders. Alrighty, I think. So I outlined the website. As I alluded, every single page on it is managed by the communications team. Last year alone, we had 2.5 million page visits. So it is quite a comprehensive site, well used by the community. The communications team likes to think of it as the nexus for everything we do. So social media helps us, start dialogues that inform people, but everything kind of brings itself back to the website. As part of that, you get a sneak peek. We're actually looking to do a redesign. Somehow it's been 5 years since we updated this website. For me personally, since I handled the redesign last time, it does not feel like 5 years has passed, but that is coming up towards the end of 2023, early 2024. We'll look at redesigning it a little bit. The subject matter won't change too much, but it'll have a different look and feel to it. So something to look forward to.
Are you thinking of moving to a different platform to support it, or what are you using right now, and what are you thinking of moving to?
Sure. We use a solution by a company called Civic Plus. They are one of the larger municipality companies, along with Granicus, who tend to house a lot of the municipality websites. We're pretty excited about what we can do with that platform, but it is always good to kind of reinvigorate the way the website looks and feels to keep people invested so we can test out some other things. They have new tools that they've developed since the last time we redesigned, and we kind of want to take advantage of some of those new elements to provide a better end product for residents. I alluded to social media a little bit. It's really one of our best ways to engage with residents. In comparison to a lot of our regional neighbors, we have a highly motivated and highly attached audience, which is a great thing. It's good to see that many of the residents following our accounts. It helps us provide information and also get feedback. So we're really excited by the fact that it has been very useful for creating meaningful discussion with residents. Lets us also make sure everyone stays aware of events and things like that. A great example is our Concerts in the Green series. We try and get all of those on the calendar. And I think anyone who showed up last Tuesday for the Abagraphs will see it's a well-loved feature, and we're glad to see that people follow us enough to use those elements to stay informed on other things. Social media can feel like it's a one-way street, but we really want to make sure it feels like a dialogue between the city and the community. So to that end, we kind of tailor the content across the different platforms you see there. YouTube obviously houses a lot of our required videos, but between Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we all see different audiences there, and so we tailor the content appropriately. Nextdoor actually is the most unique. I think some of our communities around us wish we had such an engaged audience. It's something like 75% of households have a Nextdoor presence in Issaquah, so super useful for pushing out important information as well as emergency information. Yeah, either way, I think social media use of the city, we're doing a great job with it, but also that's only possible because so much of the community is also invested in finding out things from us that way. Yeah.
Police Twitter, why have they specifically decided Twitter is the preferred channel for their vital information? What's up with that?
Yeah.
They chose Twitter based on the fact that at the time we chose it, which I think there's a lot to say from the last 18 months with that platform. It was the easiest one to be able to identify important timeframes to get information out. And for most people, they view information in a chronological fashion. Other platforms like Facebook, you don't have that ability to easily get information out and be sure it'll be seen by your subscribers in the relevant time frame. Sometimes it can be days before you see a post, depending on how well it's used. So that was the idea behind using Twitter for that platform. They also do now have a Facebook page, not used for emergency information, but for highlighting events like National Night that just happened, posting photos of that and keeping you informed on other things like their blotter usage. That's kind of what they view Facebook's platforms for. But I think we'll likely be looking at how well Twitter functions in that capacity. I think a lot of municipalities are trying to keep up and make sure that stays the best source of getting information in that direction. Alrighty, as Tom already alluded to, newsletters is another thing we do. There's a few of them now. I've only highlighted 2 on here. The Issaquah Insider is our weekly newsletter, usually goes out on Fridays. Kind of more usually forward-looking, highlighting events that are coming up or important information for the community. Then we have Mayor Polly's more periodic newsletter where she highlights topics that she finds of greater importance to be sure to share with the public. We help organize that. And then 2 not pictured here that are relatively new is the Park Bench. So that's for our Parks and Community Services Department. Goes, as you might imagine, to mostly around parks information. So registration dates, camp information, those kind of things is the type of topics covered there. And I think we're getting ready for issue number 2 of Green Issaquah. So that is devoted purely to our Green Issaquah team, which is our park rangers, forest supervisor. Great information there, usually tied to restoration events and things like that, but just another way to kind of build in that content. Those 2 are very topic specific. Next up, I mentioned all of the various videos that we kind of have to cover. The city's YouTube channel and tying into ICTV. So this is another platform we house a lot all the required elements like boards, commission stuff and city council things. But also anytime the city does any kind of work that is video related, it ends up on this platform too. So another great place for people interested in keeping up what the city is doing is subscribing to our YouTube channel. One of the elements to that are the various podcasts that we do. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with them all. The two big ones are Issaquah Buzz, which is done between a couple of staff members, really focuses on economic development and kind of business rumors. We heard years ago that people really, since the loss of a regional paper, it's hard to keep up on all the kind of changing businesses in town. And this was a fun and unique way to highlight rumors that are happening around town and give people perspective on things, as well as invite local guests on to kind of talk about their businesses. So we've highlighted a number of local ones. I think my favorite one might have been the chocolate one we did about 3 or 4 months ago with Fortunato, just hearing the backstory there. So it's a great channel to hear things. The other one is Uniquely Issaquah. That one is hosted by the mayor. She, again, likes to have a moment to interview and talk with either local businesses or just residents who either have a great story to tell or things like that. So both great channels that kind of highlight unique content for the city. Next up is neighborhood engagement. So this platform has changed a little bit over the years. Before the pandemic, we had a neighborhood engagement coordinator who was really focused on being that conduit for all the neighborhoods to really hear what they need to do. We had some different staff changes during the pandemic, and really now neighborhood engagement falls on the communications team as a whole. How we look to handle that is be that voice, be that avenue for them to hear any concerns they have, but also to open up more neighborhood type meetings. So between having council listening sessions that kind of revolve around town to each neighborhood and to attending HOA meetings, those kind of things, we really want to make sure we provide that opportunity for neighborhoods to feel like they're heard and understand what concerns they have on a very localized level, not necessarily just a citywide perspective. That has been super successful in the past, but obviously during the pandemic, when they shifted to mostly hybrid and fully remote settings, this was a little tougher to keep up, and it's a goal of the communications team to really revisit those in 2023 to bring them back in person and make sure that that conduit is there again. Yeah.
Question. Do those include the neighborhood meetings that, like, for a given we in our national or our natural environment checklist, those will often be associated with a neighborhood meeting associated with a project? Is that the type of meeting here that we?
They can have some overlap. I think for the most part, when we look at neighborhood engagement here, we're trying to find those points when, you know, if we haven't heard from a particular neighborhood on a topic in a while and want to see if there are any concerns, we'll set up one outside of that. But if there are other neighborhood meetings that are required as part of project elements, sometimes there's some overlap. We can find them too. So,
and is it your team though that would coordinate those neighborhood meetings that are required?
The required ones are usually done through the project manager. So if there's like environmental impacts, things like that require a neighborhood meeting, those are usually handled through community planning and development. We can assist with making sure a location is chosen that's really accessible for everyone, but they're the subject matter experts on those issues. I wouldn't want to step on any toes saying something about the environment, requirements for coordinating that I have no idea about.
Yeah, the one thing I'd be curious about is there are all the best practices that are being applied for the engagement style neighborhood meetings or like non-required ones? Are those being transferred over into how they outreach for the required meetings or being basically messaged to the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can definitely check with community planning and development to see if they've if the format for those meetings is rigid in terms of what they have to do, or there's some ways that we can encourage just from our experience with hosting the other style that may elicit better conversation.
Yeah, and I mean less the like format for the meetings itself, but more so the messaging and like basically visibility to the community, like basically how you get people in the door.
Sure.
So what happens at the meeting itself.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I think that's another thing we can look at. I know there are requirements, so within a certain number of feet, those people for sure get outreach done to them, but that doesn't mean that's the only people affected by any of those decisions. So we can talk to them to see if there's some methodologies we can improve on for outreach.
No, that's great. Thank you.
So if you know a topic that really needs some neighborhood engagement, how do people reach out to you?
Sure, great question. We hope we're accessible by a lot of different venues for people, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're always tied in the same. We can easily be reached out to by social media, we have group email addresses for communications at issaquah.gov. We try and touch base with a lot of the HOAs in the area too, to be sure if they're hearing anything, we can get word of mouth back to us to make sure. And obviously, if those issues want to be raised to city council, they would then direct them to us to make sure to reach out to those groups. So I think there's a lot of ways it can be done. If there are other methods that you potentially are debating, I'm wondering if you're kind of leading towards something.
Well, there's a strong neighborhood upset right now going on, and that's why I'm asking the question in my neighborhood.
Sure.
Especially the school starting and the traffic in Old
Sure.
Town. Yeah,
And forgive me, which neighborhood would that be?
Old Town.
Old Town, okay.
High school traffic
Sure.
begins again.
It's all right at that time.
Yeah, here it comes, and the whole, my street gets really upset about it.
Sure.
So we don't feel, so at some point, it would be nice to get people together.
Yeah, that
There's
sounds
a
good.
lot of new people.
That's always a good time too, if there's changeover in the neighborhood and they don't have the same information, and we'll make sure to hear those voices. So yeah, we'll look into that, and Nancy, I think we'll figure out a good location for potentially talking about that topic. Making sure we have the right people in place, right? I mean, it's one thing to have myself there, but if we're talking traffic and just overall congestion, it's good to have the engineers from Public Works also there to answer those questions. Great question. All right, this is the second part of the thing. Is there anything else anyone's curious about just from communications in general from the city?
Can you share a little bit about the plan? Like you alluded to it a bit, but not so much the changes that happen as a result of COVID, but any of the, like, how things are going to be phased back in terms of in-person versus remote, and how you're thinking about hybrid for some of these events.
Yeah, so the communications team feels that now in 2023, we want to make in-person meetings the standard. If there are topics or there are groups that it makes sense to consider more variables and make sure that there's a lower barrier to entry. But I think for the most part, we're advocating when we meet with project managers to host in-person meetings to really make sure the community can see people face to face, to kind of formulate those questions as best as possible. That is the standard we're going with, but obviously, like I said, there's sometimes different groups that make sense to make sure we apply that hybrid setting, so we can be sure to hear from as many community members as possible. Yeah.
Have you thought of giving the communities a choice,
In terms of,
whether they meet in person or virtually or hybrid?
yeah, so we do often reach out. I think it depends on the audience. Sometimes we're talking physical in terms of demographics, like either it's a neighborhood itself or we're trying to reach out to a specific section of the public. Let's say, I know we have some meetings coming up around ADA compliance. So Dale, who's running that project, has reached out to that community to really be like, okay, here's the topic in question. Here's a facility that could host it. The topic in mind lends itself well to making sure it's a hybrid setting, so people don't feel like they need to attend in person, especially for that topic. So they do reach out on occasion. Are you thinking more like, are you thinking physically, like neighborhoods and things like that, offering options?
And then I guess my other question is, do you meet in the neighborhood or do you have them come to you?
It depends on, again, the topic. I think it's very localized to a specific setting. Blackbird Park's a great example. We had meetings in the park itself because the neighborhood was really focused on learning more about what the next project stages were going to be. If the topic is likely to be quite interesting to a larger percentage of residents, we want to make sure we choose a location that can house everyone comfortably. So those tend to be city locations, but that's definitely something considered if we're determining if this needs to be something in the neighborhoods or if we need to find a location that can be housed by everyone.
And then when you have these meetings, are you usually having them after traffic has died down?
Ideally, yes. I would say the average meetings usually start between 5 and 7. Again, depending on what the audiences are, we do consider that as part of the toolkit is to really look at who is your invested audience, who's likely to want to attend, and are things like making sure the meeting starts at a time that's comfortable for those commuting in or needing to find childcare. Those kind of things are considered for sure.
And so, and tell me way again, like that you feel it's better to meet in person rather than hybrid or
Sure.
or virtually, if that's what they want to do.
Yeah, if we hear that that's a preference from the audience we're trying to reach out, we'd obviously look at making a correct corrections or adjustments to the format. What we heard from residents for most of the last 18 months is the preference for in-person meetings. So that was the reason we've advocated to bring those back to a more standardized format.
Cool. Yeah, so whatever's the preference by people, I guess what I'm thinking about is traffic congestion and greenhouse gas emissions and our goals to reduce drastically.
Indeed.
50% by 2030
Yeah.
or 2035.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a constraint, right?
Yeah, and I think we missed our 2020 goal, so I'm hoping we meet our 2030 or 2030.
Certainly, that's definitely a constraint. I think what we found was the residents felt less heard when they were sitting behind a computer trying to talk to residents. Not that that's concern for congestion and overall greenhouse gas shouldn't be considered. I think it's taken as a larger package to try and determine it. If we hear otherwise from the community, we're always actively trying to make sure that platform fits best. That's kind of where we're sitting right now.
Yeah, and maybe they have maybe some of the communities have a nice place to meet.
Yeah, I think
Somebody's yard.
ideally something like that would feel most approachable. We had a listening session at the Atlas Apartments, really just in the lobby right there, which I think afforded residents who perhaps wouldn't come to an average city council meeting or come all the way down to City Hall a chance to experience being able to speak with city council members in a different atmosphere. And from those who showed up, they really enjoyed it. So I think that's something else. Again, finding those locations that are more approachable to the residents you're trying to reach and lowering the barrier as much as possible is always good.
Yeah, and I would think that if you go to them, that you might have a greater turnout as well. You know, if you're right in their neighborhood and they just have to walk over,
Hopefully it's super
drive a
convenient.
couple blocks.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions before I switch over to the toolkit? Sure.
Yeah, so I dug out an old Issaquah Insider newsletter from a couple of years ago and tried to follow the links to the content, and the links were broken. So disappointing. Do you have a solution for that problem?
Yeah, I think I remember this conversation.
I have brought this up before.
No, it's certainly one that from an archival perspective isn't suited to the way we currently handle the newsletter. So topics within our website are relevant for certain periods of time, we feel. We don't need to keep every single news item that comes out because that causes a lot of bloat in terms of the size of the website we have to maintain. So if we have a survey open for 3 or 4 weeks, we'll be sure to have that news item open that entire time frame and a little bit beyond it so people can find it still. But 12 months or 18 months later, that link would no longer work. There's not really an easy solution based off the way we currently build out the newsletters using the software we do to kind of alleviate that. But that's also because the material you're looking for doesn't really exist. We don't treat the website as an archive for long-term purposes. Our city clerks do with their end of the website. Everything required by policies and things like that are stored for long term, so you can find them anytime. But smaller news items and things like that are time sensitive, so they kind of disappear. So we don't really have a way to address that, unfortunately.
Well, my opinion is that just as you have a duty to communicate and engage with the public, as the city is doing a commendable job with that, there is also a duty to capture the history of what's going on in our beloved little town, and especially in the context of the demise of local journalism and Issaquah Press going away, etc. Well, what is capturing the history of the town? Most newsletters now of all the nonprofits and the governmental entities are following the same sort of pattern. There's an email with links to content somewhere else, which is transient. And so we're reporting real time very well, but we're capturing nothing for history. And so I think the city should evaluate that and put some effort into solving that problem. And actually, it may be something to bring up with your platform provider, Civic Plus or whatever it was. Because this is not a problem just with this. This is a problem everywhere. This is the common way communication is occurring, And many entities, governmental agencies and otherwise, have this problem of generating newsletters which are lost. And wouldn't that be great if you could push a button to fetch all that content and generate it into a PDF that can be then stuck somewhere and is an archival thing, which doesn't depend upon links to places where that no longer exists.
Yeah,
So we could take that action item.
I will absolutely take it back and look at it and see if there's some solutions to potentially implement to kind of capture that data.
I would like to just say that Tom has done an excellent job capturing the history of Issaquah Trails Club. Yeah, so because we had physical newsletters and now we have digital newsletters, and he archives everything now. So you just click on the archive and you can go to whatever year you want, all the way back to, I don't know.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ann. So, yeah, I have solved that problem for Issaquah Trails Club, but now without some pain.
Mhm.
It takes me about an hour each time.
Yeah.
And I have some two scripts that I've built up to help pull all those pieces together and grab the HTML, and then I merge it all into Word and fix things up and generate a PDF. Done. Sometimes it only is half an hour, but I mean, it's work. And it's work that could be streamlined and automated through more powerful scripting tools. And hey, the website platform company, Civic, they should solve this, because then many could benefit from such a wonderful tool. But I think it's worth the effort to do something about it, even if it's not perfect. It might be good enough. To capture something, not a form that would really be suitable for publication, but might be suitable for archival purposes. At least we captured the content in a way that can be referenced in the future. And the city recognizes the duty to maintain the history of the community by supporting the Issaquah History Museum. And they don't have the resources to solve this problem for all the generators of content throughout the city either, but that's kind of ties in with the recognized responsibility of the city towards maintaining the culture and history of the town.
Understood, yeah. We will definitely look into it and see if there's some solutions that we can either advocate for or perhaps implement.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Love it.
All righty, second part of today, and I know I'm already going long, I apologize, Stacy, is I will briefly talk about the public engagement toolkit review that we've recently updated. This is, feel free to advance the slide. The toolkit's an internal tool. So like I said, we use it to work with project managers as they start to plan out what their projects look like. It highlights tools and previous experiences that the communications team has pulled together to highlight ways to get the project done most effectively and making sure we capture public outreach when it's most pressing and most important to both the project managers and the community involved. So at the highest level, it's a guide. We be sure to highlight the tools that are possible, but it's been refined year over year to make sure what we see that's successful is implemented as a best practice moving forward. I believe there was a version of the toolkit in the attachment, so feel free to browse around. I pulled in a couple of example worksheets here that highlight what we're doing. That's the biggest change we had this time. The previous version read more like a resource document, so project managers could pull it off the shelf and kind of revisit it a little bit. But what we did now is turn it into worksheets, so they can take it off multiple times as they get to different phases in their projects, fill it out as needed, and then work with communications to devise a strategy. As you can see on one of these like here, there's lots of areas to fill in, lots of links to various projects. Communications team is planning to actively keep this up to date for project managers. So as we hear and see projects that are good representations of different levels, we can update those areas as well. Don, question?
Yeah, thank you, Donna. So this is a pretty robust toolkit here. It's very well done. Thank you. Is this mandatory on all the big CIP projects? Is it widely used? Is it accepted?
Yes, it is absolutely required. So it helps us make sure, because every project would come to communications. As I alluded to earlier, we help make sure the project outreach is done effectively. But to understand the parameters, I'm not an engineer, so I need them to provide me what's happening. And this is a great document for them to fill out as they're looking through all the details and bringing it to us to help us understand what the constraints are.
So I enjoy the communication from the city and the newsletter going in and choosing my subscriptions. And then there's another page where you can say, I'm interested in the following things, news about a particular neighborhood, et cetera. Where I've been a little bit frustrated is there might be a specific project that I'm interested in. For example, the SPAR, the pump station, SPAR thing. Maybe I just didn't check the right boxes or whatever. So I would like to see a little more clarity to project-specific communications. And so like on the page that has tools used, project status report delivered to interested parties via email sort of thing. So I would like to be able to say, yeah, I'm specifically interested in updates for specific projects. And I don't know, it's my perception that most projects don't get regular updates, and the city doesn't have the resources to do this every day or every week or something. But the East Lake Sammamish Trail, which is under the jurisdiction of King County, I'll point to that as an example. They do a weekly status report, and I have subscribed to that. And I enjoy getting it. And, it's a trail that I'm very interested in. As soon as it's ready, I want to go take a ride on it and all that. So, I don't look at every one of them, but I enjoy getting it. I would be content with monthly or something. And I offer that as an example of the kind of engagement that I like to get for projects that I'm interested in the city. I'd like to say, yes, I do want status reports regularly, and I want to know what's going on with that, and be able to have clarity that I've selected that and then receive it by email. So that's just a suggestion I have on that. Thank you.
That's a great one. It's not the first person to bring it up. I think we've toyed with the idea of building out lists per project. Usually the problem stems from what to do once the project finishes. This audience that they're invested in, let's use a SPAR project as a great example. There might be other things that they're actively interested in, but based off spam laws, we can't actually use that list anymore once we've finished the project. So it wouldn't be able to say, we finished a SPAR project. If we had a different trail project that we think there'd be a lot of overlap, we couldn't then reach out to that group with that same list. The compromise then was trying to build them out by category. So if you're really interested in parks and community services type things, so that's what trails would kind of fall under. Everything in parks, we could then push out to that list as well. So it's kind of a continuation on topics. But I think it's a great idea. I think it's not the first time we've heard it, something that's more project specific. We can look into some options that might be able to, it wouldn't be a continuation, but at least you would feel like you were informed on that project before it ended.
Great, thank you.
Some of the other larger cities, and you guys probably don't have the resources, but they'll develop a web page for every project. Then you can click on it and add your name for that project.
Yeah, that secondary feature, once it's already on the website, it's one of the other ones that we've looked at. Again, I think that we've come back to the idea that it's once the project's over, how do we keep informed of that audience if we technically can't anymore because of spam laws? But again, it's something we could look into, see if there's a way around that.
Close the list.
Yeah. Alrighty. So I didn't put all of the pages on here. That was in the attachment. If you feel free to look through, if there's anything in particular you have any feedback on or interest in, I'm happy to answer those questions. But these were the bigger ones. As I alluded to, the usefulness has been changed from a more of a resource to a guiding document. The worksheets make that a little bit easier. We took the toolkit to the equity board before it was finalized to make sure they had a chance to review the equity improvements that we made and get feedback from them. And then the identification of additional tools that were not in the previous version of the toolkit. So we've updated with those as well. And we've had a robust conversation, but I'll happily take any more questions should they be here. This time.
So on the last page, I think it was report and evaluate and there's a box about what did I learn that will inform something. So that's I was happy to see that box. So it's kind of a lessons learned step in the process. Well, what went right, what went wrong, how we're going to address that moving forward. I guess I wanted to suggest maybe adding some more words there about, included in that would be looking for systemic weaknesses in the process. What things didn't work well in terms of the process. Although the reason why we didn't think about that is because there's a process failure over here, in this particular in public works, blah, 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 whatever. So I'm just reminding the reviewer that, okay, let's look for systemic process in our internal processes. Instead of weaknesses in our internal processes, a refinement to the wording.
Sure, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Any other questions?
So,
Thank you.
thank you, Tom.
Thank you for your time. Sorry, Stacy, for running so long.
That's okay.
All right.
All right, we are about 15 minutes over, just not that we have to rush through everything else, but just for everyone's awareness, that's where we are. I think that was because of our questions, not because of the presentation. So
I apologize.
good, lots of questions are not a bad thing. Yeah. So next up, we have comprehensive plan update. I think Stephen will probably be taking it away from here.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, good evening. Thank you again. My name is Stephen. I'm the Long Range Planning Manager with Community Planning Development. And tonight, the purpose of my presentation is to do initial review with you of the goals, draft goals and policies for the new element that's going to be going into the comprehensive plan. For tonight, we have 3 questions for you. For simplicity, I'll be asking the first question as I'm going through the slides with the draft goals and policies, just so because I have a lot of slides to go through with you tonight. And then at the very end, Stacy and I will discuss the last 2 questions with you at the very end. So before I get started, I want to provide just a brief reminder about what this project is. As you know, the comprehensive plan is a required long-range planning document required from the Growth Management Act, which is focusing on kind of that 20-year time frame. For this update, we have to incorporate changes that comply with the state, regional, and county requirements, which address multiple different topics and are through the different elements, and then we'll cover those as we talk through the different elements. All the elements that are on the presentation, these are all we're working on. You can see the 2 that are highlighted are 2 that are actually not required by the state that we incorporate into a comprehensive plan. And we are building in a new environment-based or specific element that we are all discussing tonight. So the scope of the update for the new element will incorporate several different goals. The first is first finding compliance for House Bill 1181. I think, as I mentioned at the last meeting, we're actually not required to comply with this new bill until 2029, but we actually have a lot of the foundational concepts that are listed on the screen that is now required by this bill to be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. So we're actually looking at how best to structure it and how best we can comply with this bill sooner than 2029. I think the only thing that we're still needing more formal guidance on is the language in the bill that looks at multimodal level of service for transportation, but we are looking to have discussions around concurrency in the coming years, which may be addressing that new requirement from this bill.
Steve, we do have a question here. That's all right.
Yeah, please.
Just a quick question, Nancy Davidson. How frequently do you have to update the comprehensive plan?
So the periodic update that's required by the state actually has to be done every, it's going to be every 10 years. Previously, it was required every 8 years, but the legislature just changed it. The city of Issaquah actually goes through annual updates, which are optional to do frequent updates to the comprehensive plan, but we're looking to actually do less of that so we can actually focus more on the implementation of a lot of this long range vision rather than constantly having to go back into the comprehensive plan to update our goals and policies. Are there any, I can't see the whole room. Are there any questions?
You are good.
Okay, thank you. Another goal that we're trying to achieve with this periodic update is trying to get the comprehensive plan to the level that it was originally intended, which is that 20-year document that contains the city's long-range goals and policies. In the last periodic update and every previous update prior to it, we didn't have as many boards and commissions as well as all the functional plans that were created for implementing the city's vision in the different topic areas. And so now we have all these different implementation, strategic or action plans built in all the different areas. We don't need all those actions or very specific topics identified in the comprehensive plan. So we're actually doing that review across all the elements to take out any of those very specific policies that are actually actions in those implementation plans and keeping the comprehensive plan at that level of goals and policies. And we had a discussion at the previous meeting talking about kind of that difference between goals and policies and what should be in the comprehensive plan and what should be going into the functional plans or for this group, the Issaquah Climate Action Plan that focuses more on those strategies and actions and a little more specific information around what should be prioritized for that topic area. So previously, I met with the board on April 12th, and at that meeting, I got feedback on the types of topics and goals and policies that need to be carried over into the new element that's going to be created into the comprehensive plan. And then in July, I met again with the board and got more feedback on those topic areas as well as with the title that we're going to be using for this new element. And so today I'll be diving a little bit more into those specific draft goals and policies. So now I'm going to start diving into those goals and policies. One thing to note is what's listed on your screen is how the new element is proposed to be organized. So a lot of this is carryover or at least influence from some of the topic areas from the climate action plan. And so we thought it made sense to actually use a lot of those topic areas for the comprehensive plan. It's also important to note that a lot of the draft goals and policies that are being proposed tonight are existing goals in the comprehensive plan. And so most of what we're proposing is moving it into this new element, as well as minor updates to some of the older goals and policies that weren't updated with when the ICAP was adopted. Before I start jumping into the draft goals and policies, are there any questions?
Steven, I have one question. One main or large element in Praj, I just saw yours come up, so we'll go to you next. Built environment and kind of greenhouse gas as it relates to that. Is that something that we would expect to find in this section, or is that going to be in land use?
That's actually a great point. So one of the other things of feedback we got from the April meeting was how to define what's going to be going in the land use element, where a lot of this originally was contained, and what's going to be moved into the environment element. And one of the guidance we kind of discussed at the April meeting was we are going to maintain a lot of the policies related to the urban environment and buildings in the land use element, and everything specific, or at least leaning more towards the natural environment and greenhouse gases, will be moved into the new element. And so that's kind of the differentiating factor. So a lot of what you may not be seeing tonight is actually going to be in the land use element, specific to buildings and the urban environment.
Okay, thank you. And then Praj, please go ahead.
Hi, Stephen. This is Praj, and I have a question, and I apologize if this was discussed in the April 12th meeting. I wasn't there at that time. So seems like this is a long-term planning, or long-term vision. And as you rightly mentioned before, there are new boards and new commissions, and so the more feedback you get, the more input you get. It seems like it's always kind of a moving target, right? Because you will always have input or implementations and all. So my question was, how do you, kind of intersect the planning framework with actual implementation? Do you have short-term goals to implement that, or how do you kind of mesh it and, still get the input which is required, but at the same time keep moving on the implementation part of it as well?
I'll go. It sounded like there was two questions there. So the first, with the implementation portion, a lot of that is going to be captured through the ICAP and a lot of the action items and what's prioritized through the climate action plan. And then the metrics portion, there's metrics defined in the climate action plan that are going to be recognized in the comprehensive plan, but not so specifically that one thing you'll find with implementation is when you have certain metrics that don't really get you the information you get, you want to actually change that. And we don't want to provide that level of detail in the comprehensive plan so that we're constantly having to go back to the comprehensive plan to update it, but maintain that level of detail actually in the climate action plan or the functional plans.
Okay, and so this will be basically implemented in all projects with the city, is it? That's the final goal, or is it just for the city of Issaquah for their own development purposes?
It's mainly for the city, like this for this comprehensive plan, it's mainly for the city as well, but there is coordination, regional coordination and local coordination with other jurisdictions nearby where we're wanting to coordinate on these projects to maintain a lot of the goals.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before I get going? Okay. So for this new section for trees, the first goal, we provided some minor edits, mostly with simplifying what the goal is, focus on the trees, but also to remove what we found to be a discrepancy, because previously we had a goal around identifying a 50% tree canopy for the city. That was actually an older goal prior to the development of the climate action plan. And then with the climate action plan, we updated it to increase it to 55%. So we took out the 50% that was identified in the goal, and we moved the 55% tree canopy to this new section for that environmental element. And the other policies for this area was retention of existing trees. We tried to simplify the language so it's a little more specific of what we were trying to get with the intention of the policy. And then the other two policies were no changes for what's being proposed.
I have one comment on this area. Given that we're below 55 and all of our policy in Title 18, for the most part, was about maintaining existing canopy, there seems not really a great mechanism for us to increase. It's more about retaining to not lose the existing, I think, 51 or 52% that we currently have. I think one hole that I felt there was in Title 18 as well as in this plan is a clear path to us getting to 55% tree canopy, because everything we focus on is retaining existing trees, and there's not really clear. I know there's some like tree funds, and there's not really a clear mechanism for how we would increase. So I think this is probably not so much feedback for you, Stephen, because I know you're not the one putting together our tree policy, but like that to me is a weakness. This one feels like an unattainable goal because we don't have a clear mechanism to increase canopy. We seem to only have policies to retain existing canopy.
From what I remember from the Title 18 conversations is, yes, you're correct. We do have policies about maintaining the existing canopy, but when it comes to a lot of the urban developments, the development of newer buildings, particularly in like Central Issaquah, it's actually requiring a certain percentage of canopy or green coverage for Central Issaquah and that new development that will actually help get to this goal of 55%. But I'll have to talk with our environmental staff a little bit more about is there any other policies we might be able to consider that might be able to push towards this goal?
No, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, I think there's things, David, I could look at incorporating in here, like the urban forestry plan, carbon sequestration, the park strategic plan. So we might be able to point towards some of the functional plans and make sure they're then tying back to this goal. So
I know with Green Issaquah, we plant trees. And you're part of that, yeah.
Yeah, well, most of that though is planting trees in existing green space where you are, for the most part, working on retaining or enhancing the kind of cycle of that forest. But, and there are cases you're actually expanding, but I think which is great. I think, yeah, agree. Like, love that part of the program. I'm just not sure that is going to get us to the point that we're actually increasing the tree canopy by 3% of the whole city of Issaquah. Like that feels like on a very different scale as well. But no, I think Stacy, if there's things that other elements, and Stephen as well, if there's other elements that I may be missing, but that just has always felt like a hole in our overall plan of how we would get to the 5.
yeah, we could think about some language. I think we also want to keep within the bounds of the comp plan that is trying to set these big goals and not identify the specific strategies or actions, but we can point to where those will be addressed. To help us achieve those goals.
Any other questions about these policies? Okay, I'll continue on. So for the next section is natural system water resources. We overall are mostly not proposing to make any changes to the goal and at least the last 2 policies. With D4 and D5 policies, we're actually proposing to consolidate these into one, primarily because it seemed repetitive in order to keep D5 when they were actually very similar, and it was very easy to just consolidate the 2 and rather than have them 2 separate. Are there any questions about these proposed changes?
And I'll just note for folks, this is attachment A, has the red line version of what's on the slide. These are very simplified summaries.
Thank you, Stacy. I forgot to mention that. Okay, not seeing any questions. We can also come back to this if you do see something as we're going through the policies. So the next section, streams, wetlands, wildlife. We're overall not proposing very many changes. The biggest, I would say, items to kind of point out for this page is that the shoreline master program, the purchase creekside parcels, both of those policies are under review. The shoreline master program is actually called out by House Bill 1181 as actually potentially adopting as its own element in the conference plan. So we're hoping to get more guidance from the state on what that actually means, because it is codified and is also recognized in our comprehensive plan. So we're not sure if that actually fits that compliance for what House Bill 1181 is asking for. And then for the purchase creekside parcels, this is actually very similar language that's in the parks element. So we're trying to see if it's necessary to have duplicative policy in this element.
Stephen, I did have one, it's probably more of a comment on this section. One thing that's nice about the tree canopy and is that it's probably easy to measure its scale, but one piece of feedback on this part is like, similarly, I think we would want to maximize the number of wetlands that are retained, or like stream corridor or streams and wildlife corridors. I just wonder if there's any way that we can measure that and kind of report on that at a higher level. There may not, that might be impossible. But I think what's nice about some of these is that we have clear kind of goals and overarching goals. It's a little bit harder on this one to know how we measure success against like, are we doing well or are we not doing well and need to course correct on something like this? It's really important element.
Sure. And Stacy and I can talk with our environmental staff, because I know they have certain targets that they look at for their work, but it's not necessarily identified in detail in the comprehensive plan. And I see a couple.
Hi, Stephen, and this is Nancy Davidson, and I'm looking specifically at the more detailed one. And I'm looking at policy E4, where you're talking about enhancing the riparian corridors and wetlands. But I also think we need to talk about enhancing the wetland buffers, not just the wetlands themselves. So we're missing all of that area that we set aside to protect those wetlands in Title 18, some of which is large, some of which is small. And I'm hoping that we can do more that with this to make sure that we're enhancing and protecting those buffers along the way.
Would it help if we address the buffers in the policy itself?
Yes, please.
Okay.
That's kind of what my quest was.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thank you.
Hey, Stephen, Don McWilliams. I'm also looking at the details. Policy A14 speaks specifically to park development. Why wouldn't it be all development? It's for natural drainage practices. Why wouldn't it read incorporate natural drainage practices into development? Why is it specific to parks?
You know, I can't speak to the origins of this policy being, it was a kind of an older policy in the land use element prior to the adoption of the ICAP. But from what I remember in terms of what it was intended for, was to kind of complement some of the policies that are in the parks element or the parks open space element that looked at using park development for new drainage resources for the community. But you're right, in terms of trying to incorporate in all development is probably more suitable for at least this section.
Something to look at.
Okay, thank you.
It's great as a goal. It's a great goal.
I think that's all the questions for you.
Okay. All right, well, we started to jump into the next page. Are there any questions on these other policies? Okay, I'll keep going. So for the next section is greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of this is from the climate action plan, so we're proposing no changes to these goals and policies.
Oh.
Are there any questions on this?
I guess I might have a question. How have we figured out how we're measuring our greenhouse gases yet? And do we know where we're at in comparison to like 2007?
Yeah, so we completed with King County and a number of surrounding regions, the community greenhouse gas emissions assessment this last year. And then David is in the middle of our first municipal operations greenhouse gas inventory. So we have the results from the one that was done in partnership with King County up on the dashboard. And that's something we'll also be digging into deep next year when we do our Midpoint 2024 check-in on the ICAP.
And the one that we're doing now is also inclusive of community. So it'll
Yes,
split
thank
out between
Yeah.
municipal operations and community emissions
Yes.
for 2022.
Very cool. I guess my other question might be later. I'll wait.
Was there anything around the reporting that you want to make sure is captured, or?
I think that in this long-term plan that it's captured in the ICAP. So maybe that's all that matters.
We can, and I think there is a reporting section we'll get to later. So if there's any gaps that we see there, we could think about if there'd be something appropriate specific to ICAP.
Thank you.
Good.
This is Nancy again, Stephen. And I think this also goes to Stacy. I am concerned that we're not going to meet our goals by just doing things with leading by example and outreach. We actually have to do action. At this point, we're not getting enough voluntary stuff. I know that you have actions, lead by example by implementing actions to reduce from municipal operations, but we need to do more to get the community behind this so I'm honestly feeling like we need another policy, Stephen, and we need to do something to get action from the community itself. And I don't have words for it, and I'm going to ask the subject matter experts to do that. But I think we need to get more action in this from the community as a whole and not just the municipality. These are goals. These are overarching goals. And I think we should have an overarching goal that says, do something about, climate as a community and not just by doing municipal stuff. So I'll let you guys brainstorm that one, but I would love to see another action-oriented goal in here to try and get the community to do more.
Yeah, that's great feedback. That's part of the conversation we wanted to have, or where are the gaps? And then where do we want to take leadership or identify some new policies and goals that would come into the comp plan this year?
Yeah, just while we're on that topic, and this is part of the reason I was asking the built environment question earlier, because I do think a lot of what the actions that members of the community could take or that we would want them to take have to do with homes and buildings. So I do hope we're not reviewing that part of the comp plan, but it should have policies. And I know there's things in what's been proposed by consultants around some of our mitigation goals. But yeah, it might be worth, Stacy, if we're able to get anything that's related to this from the land use on the built environment, how the city's thinking about goals to encourage homeowners, business owners, et cetera, to upgrade and retrofit their properties and for new construction as well. Go ahead, Ann, and then Praj, we'll go Ann and then Praj, and now it looks like Alex.
Okay, thanks, guys. So Ann Newcomb here. So from my perspective, the only way that we're going to meet our goals is if our power company, Puget Sound Energy, meets the goals that are stated by the Clean Energy Transformation Act and some other laws. So are we continuing to follow their progress and pressure them? Is that, and I did notice that utilities, I thought I noticed that utilities was part of the House Bill 1181, but maybe I'm wrong. I wasn't sure if that should be on here as well, the utilities. Because before we all electrify, we need to get off of coal and gas.
And is your question wanting a status update, or are you wondering if there should be something in this policy, like policy tracking?
Yeah,
that?
policy tracking our electric company. I think we need to be tracking them, because if we're not going to reach our goals.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Yeah, there is within the ICAP, there are sections around that. So yes, we are tracking, we are working closely with PSE. We've been looking at our neighboring cities and some proposed goals and policies in their comp plans that would speak to grid resiliency, redundancy, de-emphasizing natural gas. So I think if that's an area that the board is interested in seeing some policies and goals that we'll talk about as we get into the resilience component, we can bring back some examples for you all to look at.
Sorry for getting too detailed.
No, this is exactly the conversation we wanted to have.
Go ahead, Praj.
Hi, so I just have one question and one comment. So I'll start with the comment, which is, in regards to what Nancy and Jamie mentioned, about involving the community so that you can actually meet the goals. So one of the ways, and some bigger companies I've seen been doing this, is one of the ways you can do it, or one of the options would be for city to enforce their goals, or basically pass it on to their contractors, vendors, anybody they use, any developers in the city, small businesses, try to provide them some incentives as well as recognitions for reaching these goals, but try to pass on your goals to the vendors or everybody who is involved or working with the city. That is one suggestion I have. And the question I have, and this may be going to Stacy than Stephen, is how do you actually calculate, the greenhouse gas emissions? Because is it certain calculating spreadsheets or models you use? Because I have used a couple of them, and based on actually how they are used or what you use, sometimes the numbers can be deceptive. Like sometimes it can be more of an art and science than actual engineering, even though you're using a hardcore calculation spreadsheet. So I was just curious, how is that calculated?
Great. I might defer to David because he's been in the weeds in this and looking more at the spreadsheets. Is that something you can talk to a little bit about the spreadsheets and calculations that we're using for the municipal?
Yeah, so can you repeat the question on the spreadsheets in particular? I got the
So-
first question.
Right. So, David, I was just curious, how are you calculating the greenhouse gas emissions, current emissions, or, what they were a few years back versus what they are right now? Are you using a spreadsheet or a model or combination of stuff for that?
Great, thanks.
Raj, can I ask you a question? Would this be something that we'd want to dive into more detail on a future meeting so we can get the spreadsheets in front of us and have David? walk
Sure. I think that would be a great idea, Dawn.
Great. Yeah, and we are planning to bring the greenhouse gas emissions inventory to the board, but we could do kind of a preview maybe earlier on to get folks oriented to the tools and materials that we're using before we bring the results. Great. Yeah, it's a great question.
I would also note on the first part of the question on thinking about kind of contracts and who's working with the city. I think that goes towards the sustainable purchasing policy that is being worked on in the city. There could be an opportunity to add a policy around that into the comprehensive plan as well, though. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I do think, just to make sure that, and Stacy and Stephen, please make sure that I'm on the right track. I think our goal today is, we obviously have the ICAP, we have a lot of plans that go into a lot of detail on how we're going to get to these goals. Right now, what I believe we're trying to do is make sure that we focus in on what are the big priorities and overall policies that we think need to be called out at the highest level, that would then trickle down into all of the other actions and strategies that we're making. So is that accurate for like what the goal for today is?
Yes, I would say that's accurate. And because we're creating a new element, that's really the only reason we're actually bringing a lot of this to your attention. Is a lot of this was only just discussed just a few years ago, and we really haven't had a ton of time for implementation. But we just want to, because we are going through this periodic update, we want to ask the question, is there anything that we need to change with these existing policies or goals?
Right. So I think just keep that in mind as we're thinking about feedback. And obviously that doesn't mean we can't have other feedback, but I do think the key focus for us today is not to get into all the detail of every policy or every strategy that might go against greenhouse gas emissions. It's trying to highlight those really high potential policy level decisions and goal level decisions that we should have, or not decisions, but like call outs that we should have in the comp plan.
Right.
Alex, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just be really quick. I just wanted to voice my agreement with what folks have just said, a lot about just feeling like be great to be able to see some of these, how these other policies are getting incorporated into other sections of the comprehensive plan, as far as with the built environment and stormwater management and all these things that are going to impact the goals that we have set. So I don't know, I know the other boards are reviewing those, so I don't know if there's an opportunity for those to come at a later time in front of the environmental board, just to check that we see that everything is kind of lining up with the IACAP and with those other opportunities.
Yes, I can coordinate with Stacy about bringing other topics back as it fits in your calendar, whether it's an informational update via email or if we come back and actually have a discussion on it in one of your meetings.
And Stacey, I think you're already going to do this, but I think using, like you said, Redmond as an example, that looking at other cities to see like, and particularly the ones that maybe are a bit further along in Seattle, some of the ones that have made progress, or maybe they haven't, but like what have been the really impactful policies or areas that within the city that they've been able to decarbonize. I'd be curious what they already have listed as the part of their comp plans. So that just might be something, I know you're already planning on doing that, but I think there'd be a ton, basically just saying, I think there'd be a ton of value in that. And we would love to see what the result of your investigation on that is.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions on this slide? I'll keep going. So the next set of greenhouse gas emissions are primarily focused on waste. Again, this is coming from the climate action plan, so we're not proposing any changes at this time.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Hi, Steve, and it's Nancy. And if I look at these things, they're really focused on autos, which are automobiles, not on.
We're not there.
We're not there yet.
Sorry.
Yes.
I was reading ahead, but okay. Sorry. I'm focused.
But thank you. I like your proactive approach. So if there's no comments on this slide, I can move to the transportation. The one comment I'm going to make on this one is that we originally intended actually to move this goal and policies actually to the transportation element in the comprehensive plan, but House Bill 1181 actually calls for keeping this language in this new environment specific element. So right now at this time, we're proposing no changes and to keep it in the environment element, but we're hoping to get more guidance in the state on what this is. And again, these are a lot of policies that are from the climate action plan discussions. And then Nancy, we can go to your comment now.
Sorry, I read ahead, Stephen. So I guess, I know the city's been proactively working with like waste management to get a couple of green trucks into the community. But I think we need to have policies that are focused on more than automobiles, but also looking at in transportation, the buses, the green buses, green school buses, green, trying to work with others that it's not just focused on automobiles, but also heavy equipment, delivery trucks, Amazon, post office, all of these places are opportunities for us to do something in a transportation to help reduce things. And so I think we need to put some kind of transportation element in it to work with others to try and go that direction.
I think that's a good comment.
Yes, and that feeds into what I was going to talk about as well. So I would like us to, and I know we discussed this last time, but I think it should be in the transportation part, telecommuting. I think we need to be promoting telecommuting. Let people know that we want it, but also businesses, work with the businesses to let them know, hey, we've got these goals. And in order for us to reach our goals, and for the larger businesses, for us to help them reach their climate goals, let's work together on, not forcing people back to the office. If they want to go back to the office, that's one thing, but just reducing, the more telecommuting we can do, the better. A lot of businesses have started just having people come back, you know, maybe they go in like 1 day a week and meet in person 1 day a week, or getting rid of the offices. So then we get rid of the buildings, and there's a lot saved if we can just do more telecommuting and just meet face to face every once in a while. And,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, and we saw, as you pointed out, we saw that really works during the pandemic. We saw that it really helped us reach our goals. Yeah, so, and our goals in the House Bill 1181, I think we missed the 2021, which is to reduce per capita vehicle miles traveled by 18%. By 2035, we're supposed to be 30%, and by 2050, 50%. So, and I think maybe we might even have more aggressive ones in our climate action plan, yeah? Yeah, so, and from my perspective, the only way we're gonna get there is by telecommuting. And then, of course, there's the transportation, but I mean, the mass transit, but for a lot of us to get to the mass transit, we have to drive quite a ways. For like me, because I live in unincorporated King County. Thank you.
I think those are great comments. And when it comes to, you know, telecommuting, a lot of those policies are kind of captured in our transportation element now. They're not broad. So actually, I know our senior transportation planner, Thomas Valdez, is actually looking at expanding some of those policies to kind of get exactly at your point of we really should be pushing a little bit more because we know it works. But some of that is going to be either incentive driven or it's going to be decisions by a lot of the private industry to be able to really push that for employees. There's also the balance with housing, first jobs, and locations of all of that to make a lot of that possible in terms of making accessibility or making telecommuting work for people too. So there's kind of that balance across all the elements for a lot of those policies. But thank you for the comment. Any other comments on the transportation element? Or
the thing about that is if we do reach out to the businesses, some teams might not do as well. They might not be doing as well with remote working, and others are. So letting businesses know, hey, they can start, the teams that are doing well could start teaching the other teams how to do it well. Just an idea.
Yeah, I had a comment / question. How this couples in with the Commuter Reduction Act, which all employers over a certain level are required to have a commuter trip reduction plan. I think that's a state level thing, right? And does the city of Issaquah at the present time have any Issaquah specific thing about that, or is it all dependent upon the statewide plan? Just wondering whether that has any bearing on this. I mean, could the city, as a practical matter, put their own flavor on that, or would it be a matter of lobbying at the state level or King County level? I don't know. I'm just wondering. Is there anything in Issaquah specific about that right now?
I would say it's a little bit of both. So the state requires that every jurisdiction reports out all their major employers that are 100+ employees, how they're complying with a lot of that, the CTR requirements, the commute trip reduction requirements. And it's showing that they're encouraging employees to use transit, to walk or bike or take advantage of rideshare, or trying to reduce a lot of those trips. And Issaquah has a bit of I would say, its own tailored approach to it and how it's working with the employers to achieve that. And some of that, it's kind of fluctuated over the years in terms of the level of effort we've been able to put into based on some of the funding from the state. And I know that funding is going to be changing. So that may also be in changing our approach in terms of being able to provide more incentives for employers to have employees use more of those types of options.
Thank you.
Stephen, I have one last comment. This does seem like another section similar to the built environment portion of land use that I don't know the right way, but there seems like there's enough connection like that some, whether it's just Stacy or some, or the board, it seems like there'd be enough elements of the actual transportation element, like portion that would be relevant to ICAP that there's some form of collaboration that we should have, or visibility we should have to what's in that section. I know I'm sure Stacy will be involved, but that might be just something for you to think about is for the land use aspects and transportation. Is there anything that would come to this board, or what's the right way to make sure that we're capturing all of the things that would go up into the greenhouse gas emission targets and all and disparate elements?
And I can work with Stacy on how best to capture that and bring that back to the board.
Yeah, I think we could probably pull out those relevant climate and sustainability goals and policies, bring that as a package.
Cool. Alex, go ahead.
I just wanted to, I mean, even if we could just see something similar to what we're seeing in the detailed version of this, the crosswalk between the policies and how they're getting incorporated into the plan, I think just being able to see the document of it would be helpful, that we could provide written comment or glance over at a future meeting. I think the really detailed version of this, the red line, is really helpful to see how it's being incorporated.
Yeah, and a lot of the materials and the discussion tonight is really just kind of that first step of getting to the, eventually we're going to keep evolving what we're going to provide you and get you more specifics. Any other questions on this?
I think that's all of the questions.
Okay, thank you. The next section is resilience and well-being, and what you're reviewing, at least for this section, is in the existing element and coming from the climate action plan, but it's also part of the discussion with Stacy that you're going to have in a few minutes on the vulnerability assessment and how best to pursue different goals and policies for this section. So I'll kind of leave it at that and ask if there's any questions.
Stacey, do you feel like this section is more in draft form, and like, is it?
Yeah, this is just four that are being carried over from the existing comp plan that came out of the ICAP. And so what we want to talk with the board tonight about is, in June, we brought you a massive laundry list the consultants put together. We want to kind of start fresh and get more guidance from the board on what are we trying to achieve with the resiliency policies and goals here? Where do we maybe want to be leaders and be out a little bit ahead, so that David and I can then bring back a revised package of proposed resiliency goals and policies for your review next meeting. So this is, yeah, just what's in there already. We expect to have another set of 20, maybe possibly, goals and policies for your review next meeting.
So, and do you think it's best that we wait and see that proposal and then respond then, or do you want comments now?
I think it's better. Yeah, I think what we want to hear from you tonight is, I don't know if these four will change, or maybe we fine tune them a little bit based on the feedback we get from the board tonight on what they want to see. But really what we're looking for is that input on what should this next set of expanded policies look like.
I think a lot of this, is, there should be some more policy about education and outreach around this. Issaquah is not going to solve climate change on its own. It's just not going to happen. They can make a small, teeny, tiny dent in the world, but education and outreach goes a long ways because it spreads. So I think you should have something in there that speaks to it.
Stephen, do you want to go into the discussion now about the new ones? I know there's a slide later prompting that discussion. Or we
Sure, if it helps. I only have one other section, which is going to be the results and accountability.
And I don't know if Alex, did we miss another hand up? Alex, please go ahead.
All right, I just had a question about the emergency service for 100% population. I don't know how big of like a difference there is on a day-to-day basis between commuters? Is that just residents of the population? Does that include commuters and visitors that would be in the city? I don't know where is it beneficial to plan for 110%, to include services for those that aren't considered residents? It's
a great question. That came directly from the ICAP that just said emergency services could serve 100% of the population, but it didn't say if that was the permanent population or if that includes those coming in and out. So yeah, that's something we could work on fine tuning.
Is that under normal conditions or during an emergency?
Right. Yeah, and this is one thing we need to think about too. If we refine that in the comp plan, we'll want to make sure that ICAP, if we do any kind of update next year, it's going to need to be consistent because this was pulled directly from the ICAP. So there's going to be some crosswalking if we make adjustments.
Go ahead, Ann.
I love the way you're thinking, Alex. But it also made me wonder if people are coming here to work, if maybe some people that live here would be someplace else during an emergency. So would it balance out? Just a thought.
Does Issaquah track resident population versus daytime population?
Yeah, we have that actually from the Lead for Cities program. They calculated that out for us. So
Oh, awesome.
I don't know those numbers off the top of my head.
Come on, Stacy. Interesting. A lot of good things to think about.
Any other comments or questions on this section?
And
This one's coming back, Stacy.
We'll come back here in a minute if this is where we want to spend our
Okay.
time tonight.
And like I said, I just have this one other section before getting to the other question discussion. So this last section is something that we're actually be incorporating into all the elements during this periodic update so that we can clearly recognize how accountability and monitoring for a lot of the different topic areas in the comprehensive plan are being tracked. And we're also recognizing also the functional plans and what's being used for implementation for each of the different topic areas. And so that'll be this section specifically speaking to the ICAP. And we'll be working with Stacy and David to better refine whether metrics need to be recognized here or what other types of policies need to be recognized for this section.
Yeah, and here's where I believe it was Praj brought up earlier, the greenhouse gas reporting. We can think about if there's any additional language.
Yeah, this kind of gets back to a comment I had earlier about some of our areas being easy to measure progress, others being challenging, and some of those are challenging because they're challenging to measure. But that would just be something that I think to think about in a lot of these schools is how can we make them as meaningful and easy to evaluate, or at least something that we could look to evaluate. Nancy.
And I think this needs to address more than just the ICAP. I mean, if you look at it, every project that comes in is going to say its impacts to a wetland or to its buffers. And so we can easily track how we're doing there. Everyone will have the same kind of thing with it because of what we did with Title 18, with related to steep slopes or wildlife corridors. So my request is from a policy perspective and a goal perspective, we should be tracking how we're doing with our wetland buffers. If a developer comes in and is improving a wetland or its buffers, we should have some way of tracking that along the way. I mean, that's a great goal, and I would like to see that as a goal for us to try and dive deeper and being able to report to our residents how we're doing on that, on trees, on other things that we have higher goals.
Yeah, and I think this directly relates to, I think the mechanism that we've been asking for is the natural environment checklist, that we've been asking to get it towards that for the last couple of years. I think Nancy just articulated how that tool could be used and impacts to all of these things in a way that would help us evaluate whether we're succeeding or not on a lot of these goals. So
Did you understand that, Stephen? You're looking a little puzzled by it.
No, I'm taking it all in. I'm gonna connect with Stacy and David, and then we'll talk with our environmental staff of how best to do that. Of if there's other city documents that we need to recognize in this section that defines those targets already, then we should just want to recognize those. But I think that's actually a great point. Of it's more than just the ICAP. It's also a lot of the other documents that are implementing or helping us meet these targets identified in this entire element.
Yeah, I'm just saying, we can probably maybe calling it out general with the idea of the natural environment checklist. That may change, its name may change, so we just want to be careful about how specific and detailed, but yeah, I like that idea.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I can go to the second question. Are there any new goals or policies to consider for the environmental? I think we've kind of talked about that as we've gone through each of the different goal areas and policies, but is there anything in addition that you would like to discuss?
One, and I don't know where we're at on the we talked a little bit about the kind of carbon, what's it called? No, not the carbon footprint, but our like, not the catalog, it's a similar word. Anyways, like basically measurement of where city of Issaquah is on, like where emissions are within the city.
The inventory.
The inventory, that is the word I was looking for. Because one of the things that I think would be really helpful, and I don't think it's the right conversation for us to have here, but would be really interesting to know is within that inventory, where do we see the really big place? Like where can we make a lot of movement? Where is the areas that we think are the highest potential? Because we haven't really had, like, it's hard to have that conversation without knowing the numbers of like, this is built environment, this is transportation, this is, so some of that, it might be helpful in a separate conversation for us to talk, like look at the inventory, talk through where we actually think there's a lot of movement that could be made. Because that ultimately, like it's a numbers game on greenhouse gas. So not an answer, but something that could be helpful to help us evaluate if there's any other goals that we should be thinking about. If there's a big bucket of emissions that we're not evaluating with these or kind of addressing with this comp plan update, then that might indicate that we should be thinking about that area.
Well, I think that's a great filter we can apply when we bring back the next set, and maybe that becomes a new mitigation goal or policy. But David, I can definitely look at that and what's missing from here, where are those biggest impacts from our inventory and that goal or policy. Yeah.
I guess I'm not seeing a category for buildings here.
Everything
But I know
for
it's doing it.
Yeah, for a lot of the goals and policies related to buildings or the urban environment are going to be captured in the land use element. And so once we have discussions with the Planning Policy Commission on that element, we'll be bringing a lot of that to you to take a look at.
So would land use cover the carbon footprint of a building, you know, the whole
Yeah.
entire, yeah, okay, cool.
Yes.
Awesome.
It's the use.
I have one.
Okay.
So this might be in results and accountability, but what I see is missing is some of the opportunities to advocate for some of these things. And here's my example to you, and I don't know how to write this, but Stephen, could we somehow try to push to get the electric mail trucks into the city of Issaquah? We have to advocate to try and get that to happen, because we know the Postal Service is doing that. Couldn't we try and be the leader and get them to bring them here first? Amazon is doing the same thing. Can we try and push them to advocate to bring them here? So I don't think we have the leverage, but we have to be thinking about the opportunities and advocating and partnering with these guys to say, hey, try us here first, and here's why. And that's my proposal. I don't know what to write there, Stephen, but I think we need to provide that opportunity for people that are trying to do the right thing to have them do the right thing in Issaquah before they go somewhere else.
Yeah. And there's a lot of real estate for solar on top of, for example, the post office.
Right.
And a lot of other buildings as well. So when they have their fleet, their electric fleet, they also have solar panels to replenish them.
Yeah.
Any other?
This isn't the only time you all get. Well, maybe moving in just around specific to the resilience policies to provide some more direction for us on what to bring next meeting. I think that's what we're looking. We brought you a very long list of goals and policies. We're looking to bring something a little bit more streamlined. And so just looking for what you all want to achieve with those climate resiliency goals and policies. Are there areas that we want to be maybe a step ahead or demonstrating leadership in our community with what we're stating in the comp plan? There may be some areas where we need to wait for state guidance and it might be appropriate to do so, but just looking for a little bit more feedback from the board so we can bring a stronger list to you all at the next meeting.
To Nancy's comment, this might be a good section to include a policy here about promoting local businesses to start using electric vehicles.
And I think, Nancy, this is drawing from the list, I think it's June 14th. I'm looking at the packet from June 14th, which has the report out from the consultants that also has some mitigation policies.
Yeah.
And I think, but you're looking specifically for like the resilience part of.
Yeah, and I think we also just look at that question before and where there might be some gaps. We can use that as a filter and go back through that list from the consultants and see if there are any additional goals or policies that we want to build in that weren't.
One topic area that comes to mind that I think you'll probably be bringing back anyways, but is given all our goals around tree canopy and wanting to have healthy forests, it seems like there's a natural tie-in between that and wildfire risk that the more the city can do to be a leader on ensuring that not only do we have forests, but it's healthy and fire resistant, and residents are informed on how that can be supported and how they can be a part of that solution. Seems like an area within resilience that it would make sense for us to be in a leading position.
Absolutely. And I was reading in House Bill 1181 about FireWise, and their wording was separate human development from fire-prone areas, reduce residential development pressure in wildland urban interface areas. So I don't know what our codes are in our areas that are more forested, and we've got so many forested areas. Just something to think about. Yeah. And then I know that the city will want to start, acquiring a lot of those that are closer to the that have trail connectivity, but are also closer. Maybe people have large pieces of land, and I know it gets expensive, but maybe the city could start thinking about purchasing those pieces of land so they don't get developed and we don't get closer to the forests.
If you do want to address wildfire resilience in here, you might want to look at forest practices and promote and educate on good forest practices in your yard. You don't want to leave a lot of debris or fuel underneath your tree canopy. You want to clean it up. You want to have healthy plants under there. Cut down on the risk. Could be something there, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so is it The Firewise is probably already on the website, yeah?
But on our website.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it is, but it may be through Eastside Fire and Rescue, but I can talk with our emergency manager. But yeah, I'm definitely hearing show some leadership around wildfire so we can, and some of these more specific actions, so we can look at developing some goals and policies.
Yeah, even more education at trailheads and things like that.
Yeah.
Other filters or areas that we should emphasize as we look to bring you back to the next set of resilience policies?
I mean, I think everything else seems like areas that you're gonna come back with anyways around like flood management. Like, I don't know if there's anything. Well, Alex, why don't you go ahead? You have something.
I feel like this could be a spot, and I don't know if it's being incorporated in other aspects of the comprehensive action plan or the comprehensive plan, but to incorporate equity and justice and accessibility to natural areas for well-being and things like that. I feel like there's maybe another section element in the plan that talks maybe more about that. But this could be kind of addressing some of that. And I don't see equity addressed in these areas. I know in the decarbonization plan that's proposed for this agenda too, it talks a lot more about that. But if there's opportunities to include language that kind of talks about that in any of these policies, or if we can just learn where it is being included in the plan, that would be helpful.
Great, yeah, I think to the specific example you gave, we can look at the parks. I don't know all the parks goals and strategies, but look, or goals and policies, we can look to see where it's included there and flag that for that team. But yes, I think environmental justice, access, those are things that we definitely want to incorporate into the resiliency component. And there are some requirements in 1181 around that. So we will use that as a filter the next step.
And this is a half-formed thought, and I don't know how this would, but we talk a lot about like human resilience to climate change. We talk a lot about our ecosystem and like trees and wetlands as kind of inanimate objects. What we don't specifically call out is the impact of like animals that are in those ecosystems. And so in some ways, it would be nice to address, like, I mean, salmon and fish seem like a really obvious one. There's plenty of others that will likely have see impacts. And so that just seems like a lens. I don't know what the policy is, but and it's sort of indirectly or directly impacted by improving the ecosystem. But I just do wonder if there's other things that we should be thinking about with them as a stakeholder or someone in mind. So. Go ahead. I don't know who was first. So Anne and then Alex.
Alex, go ahead.
Alex, you're up.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering where water quality would be addressed in either this section or in another section of the comprehensive plan.
There's a few policies in this new element or in the new element, but there's more goals and policies around water quality actually in the land use element that we'll be bringing back to you later.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So, and to come here, I know we have heating and cooling centers. Maybe just ways of letting people, like even homeless people, know. Did we talk about that already? I think we might have. Where the heating and cooling centers are and when they're available.
Yeah, I think for ahead of the next meeting, that's really great feedback that we'll use to start bringing, or to start looking through the proposed policies from the consultant. I think I mentioned earlier, Redmond's about a month or two ahead of us, and they just released their draft goals and policies for this element. So we're looking to pull in some of those for consistency and where it makes sense for our community. So we'll be bringing back specifically the resilience policies at the next meeting for consideration.
Awesome.
And then Stephen, I think you have a more general timeline around the comp plan too.
I do. So we're still kind of in the initial stages of the comprehensive plan update. We'll be starting some council committee review later this year and then working towards docket and continued conversations on a draft early next year. The ultimate goal is to try to get adoption around Q3 2024. And that concludes my presentation. Any other questions or comments?
Doesn't look like it. Thank you, Stephen.
Great work.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, I think with that, we are on to facilities update municipal decarbonization resolution. We may want to talk about what our goal for that is tonight. And Stacy and David, I don't know if you want to take that on, just like, do we actually want to just review it at a high level? Do we actually want to take action? What's the level that you think is we would like to get to tonight?
Great, yeah, so purpose of this presentation, there's a lot happening with our facilities in parallel yet coordinated. So David was going to give a brief overview of the different studies and analyses that are underway. As part of that, we are proposing a assessment that the city would do on its own buildings to look at steps to decarbonize them. And we have a resolution that we are looking for the environmental board to take action on, so that we could then send it on to council to go on their agenda and sign off on it, essentially. So if the comprehensive plan discussion went long, our thought was we could at least provide the overview presentation and introduce the resolution, and then we could hold action until the next meeting. We have about 8 minutes left in the meeting.
I am happy to go through it fairly fast, and perhaps if there's at the end, we could, if there's anything that folks want more detail on or want to come back to, we can do that at the September meeting.
Yeah.
That works?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Why don't you get started and I'll.
Sure. So we were going to ask for action on the decarbonization resolution. And I thought that given all of the work that's being done on our facilities, it would be a disservice to not kind of talk about it broadly and put it into context. Starting off, why buildings? This goes to your point earlier, Jamie, on kind of we know that buildings in King County represent around 46% on slide 3. 46% of our greenhouse gas emissions countywide, based on our 2019 regional inventory. For Issaquah, that looks like it's around 52%. And so kind of addressing greenhouse gas emissions from our building sector is very critical if we want to reach our emission reduction goals. Most of the emissions associated with buildings do come from operations, although there is definitely emissions associated with embodied carbon as well. So the building materials, et cetera, themselves.
One just quick note, as we think about looking at this, looking at the big numbers on the left and how much of that is in sections that are not in the environment, like how important those other sections are just highlighted by that slide there.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, right. Buildings is the most important.
And then transportation is the next.
Yes.
So the two sections that we aren't discussing in detail.
Focus on those.
So just some of the.
We will pull out those relevant policies.
I like it.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And from these are not great colors, I'm realizing, but anyways, the way in my mind that I'm kind of splitting out some of our building work is, right, there's buildings that we own and operate as a city, and then buildings out in the community. And then within both of those two buckets, there's existing buildings and new buildings. Next slide. Mainly today, I was going to be talking about our efforts related to existing municipal buildings. But that's not to note that we don't have efforts and policies and programs related to the other kind of buckets of buildings. But right now, there's a lot of work going on municipal facilities. Next slide. So this, I was actually quite proud of this graph because I'm, again, not very good at these, but this is to kind of show the different levels of assessments and work that we're doing. And the idea is that each one of these is a fairly separate assessment that on its own would be valuable to the city, but kind of layering them together will get us to the point where we as a city can know when and where to make the right investments in our facilities. So starting out kind of on that benchmarking level, go to the next slide, actually. Going through this very fast. This is currently ongoing, but the idea with this is to look at our energy use at our buildings and compare that energy use to state targets around what buildings of that type should operate at, right? So, you know, police stations that operate 24/7 have higher kind of targets for energy use than, say, a building that is just an office building used during the day. So this energy benchmarking is really kind of very high level, looking at our utility data. What is the energy use of a building? What's the intensity of that energy use, and how does it compare to comparable buildings? So this is currently ongoing, and we're planning on doing it to almost all city buildings. I do have all here, but I think there are a few buildings we are not going to look at simply because they are rental properties that we do not have control over some of their utility use and things like that, but we are looking at almost all buildings.
So if you're looking at buildings, are you looking at pump stations and fire stations? And those are all buildings owned by the city.
Yes, fire stations, yes. The energy benchmarking and efforts, I do not believe incorporates pump stations themselves, but I can look into that.
So it should.
It should.
And wells.
Yeah, well, there might be small structures that generate a lot of power, and there's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think they're definitely included in the facilities condition assessment. So kind of what is the condition of those facilities?
But I think energy benchmarking for your pump stations is really important because some of them may not be operating very efficiently.
Okay.
So you can be using a lot of energy and not even realize it.
Great. I will look into that.
How many buildings does Issaquah have?
It's in the range, I should have the number, but it's in the range of 25, 30. And probably half of those are operated by the city. A little over half of them are operated by the city and the rest are rented.
Oh. Yeah. Good. So we make money on it.
We're renting from someone, or is that, are we renting?
Oh, sorry, no, we are the landlord. And
Oh, we are the
renting
landlord,
from
okay.
us. So yes, we make some
Okay.
money.
Some of that, like Gibson Hall, I think we make $1 a year from.
Yes.
Kiwanis.
Yeah.
One is rented to, there's a restaurant actually occupied by a restaurant, so it really varies. We have single family home.
Yep.
So interesting portfolio.
I see.
Other questions on the benchmarking? So the next assessment level that just got kicked off yesterday is our facilities condition assessment. And this is going to happen for the rest of this year and is really looking at just what is our equipment and the condition of our facilities. So not necessarily looking at what we should do with our facilities beyond kind of at what point do we need to replace the facility or the equipment? How old is the equipment? How well is it operating? So really just the baseline, what do we have and how is it performing right now, to help us understand when should we be replacing equipment. What are the pieces of equipment that really need to be replaced right now versus equipment that can wait for, a few years before being replaced, etc.
And again, that will include pump stations, right?
I believe so. I can look back at the scope of work.
Okay.
Next level is energy audits, and we're doing this in kind of a phased effort that's looking at our biggest buildings first. And the energy audits it builds on the benchmarking, and the idea is to look for energy projects in our facilities that will help us improve energy efficiency. The criteria we use to define kind of what improving energy efficiency means is a conversation at the city and in conversation with contractors, et cetera. And we can kind of help define that and include greenhouse gas reductions, et cetera, into that conversation. But these energy audits will help us understand, say, for any given building, what are the different projects that will have the biggest bang for our buck, essentially, on improving what the energy efficiency of that building is going to be.
Will they be looking for energy leaks and where they might be able to put more insulation in?
Yes. Yep. So this is kind of looking at equipment, right? So do we need to replace our HVAC system, as well as things like weatherization and other things in that line?
So why are we starting with the biggest buildings first instead of the most energy intensive use buildings?
Great question. So I think the biggest buildings are our most energy intensive buildings, in terms of like the pool, the community center, and the police station. And those are going to be some of the ones that have the biggest projects that we can pursue right now.
Did want to do a time check. I do know some of us, I think Tom and I both came on bikes, and it's starting to get dark.
Yes.
Tom, I think, how is everyone feeling about continuing, and how much longer do we feel like we will need to kind of get to a good stopping point?
I'd be okay with 5 or 10 minutes, but I guess I don't want to go beyond that.
Yeah.
You got about 15 minutes of daylight left.
Can we do 5 minutes?
Yeah, I can do even shorter than that. So the last kind of bucket in this is the decarbonization assessment, and this kind of relates to the resolution that we are asking council to pass. But the decarbonization assessment really looks at how can we remove fossil fuel use in our facilities, right? So it goes even step beyond the energy audits to ways that we can decarbonize our buildings and look at all of those different projects that will achieve that for our buildings. This is also looking at all city buildings, right? So with the same exceptions perhaps as the benchmarking, but this will be looking at all buildings so that we, with the result of all of these assessments layered together, we should have an idea on what equipment needs to be replaced when, what equipment is going to have the best energy efficiency improvements, what equipment needs to be replaced for decarbonization goals and greenhouse gas reduction goals, and kind of being able to layer them all together so we know when and where to invest our funds. Yes.
Can we add which buildings would be good to have distributed energy on it, like solar panels?
That is included in the decarbonization assessment. Yeah, so the scoping effort for that is kind of underway right now, but that's going to be including information on renewable energy, on municipal buildings, as well as things like electric vehicle charging infrastructure and existing electrical capacity of buildings and things like that.
Love it, so exciting.
Mm-hmm.
My only comment is decarbonization should include more than just buildings. And so while I looked at the Title II resolution that you have propose it needs to say that it's just buildings in the resolution because the city has more to do on decarbonization. I think we've talked about equipment, we've talked about vehicles, and I think we should be going further is my suggestion to you. So if you want to focus on a resolution to take advantage of all the work on buildings being done, just call it decarbonization of buildings.
Okay.
And then next, bring forward the next piece of this, which is decarbonization of other things in the city.
Thank you.
Great work. Thank you so much for doing this.
Sure.
All right, I think with that, we'll come back to that. That'll be something we'll take action on at the next meeting. Thank you, David. Any other business or anything to cover, reports?
I'll just share, I'm gonna start doing updates on council meetings, both what's just recently happened with council, what's coming up. I'll send out an email with those highlights tomorrow for you. And then just to know what is coming up. Next meeting is continued conversations on the comp plan. We'll look to take action on the building decarbonization resolution. And then we'll also, we're going to do a intro to the sustainable purchasing strategy to prepare for today. We're getting some additional input from the board on that.
Awesome, thank you. As long as we don't have any other business, I think we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
as you're doing this, David, are you also looking at what buildings you might